Alright, we're going to use the following as a test. Make sure we got all our stuff right. Make sure I can be heard and seen. Mic up here a little bit because I don't care if it's in my face. I just want to make sure you guys are hearing me clearly and I have good volume. The idea is not for my face, but for the audio and to discuss certain topics within the Quran using the verses and using the logic and understanding given to us by Allah through the book, and also an attempt to try to dispel the necessity to understand things from external sources. The process of that is pretty clear cut and easy to do once you understand what it is you're doing. So we'll save that discussion for another time. Today's discussion, peace and blessings to you all, and thank you for the opportunity of being able to be heard and listened and considered. And I will tell everybody always, take everything you see or hear from anyone in regards to the Deen and do your own research. Be responsible for your own actions and understandings as Allah has instructed, and take it to the book and read and study and ponder and find out if what I'm saying has some merit, or if you find issues or problems with it. I'm open. I'm always open. I'm not stuck in my ways and just have a narrow path and a narrow-minded thought and process. I'm open to learning and exploring and understanding things as Allah had intended, and if I find a truth greater than the one I've discovered and I verified it is true, then I would go with it. I think this is the process we're all supposed to be utilizing within the Deen and within what God teaches us, but many have accepted what they've learned and set themselves in stone without the option of going beyond that. And it shows. It shows in the many Muslims out there, and the way they practice, what they do, their actions, the way they treat others. It's very, very visible when you can see the difference from people who are truthful and honest and fair and clear and don't, backbite and berate and downgrade and trod on other people. All these are bad traits of and things we shouldn't be doing. They're our emotions and feelings and things that are intoxicating us. Yes, intoxicating. That's a misconception altogether that a lot of people have been given. That term intoxication from the verses has been given a narrative that it's just talking about things of like alcohol, which will be the number one thing people will bring up the first time you mention the word intoxication and ask what it means to them. They'll say alcohol, and they'll say drugs, and they'll say things of that nature, but they most often, I won't say all because that wouldn't be fair, but in most of my dealings with people who are of the same faith and the same beliefs, when asked, will usually not go beyond that in their understanding. They don't realize that ego, greed, lust, desire, power, all these things are things that you can be intoxicated by. So it's extremely important that we start to remember that and add that to our understanding when we're discussing the Deen. We should always be approaching the Deen with a clear head, a clear mind, unintoxicated by things of that nature. That's where my discussion today comes in, why I've got what I've got up here. Wanted to talk about verses 443 and verse 5:6. Now these two verses, if anybody's asked that are not thinking beyond just what they've been taught, they'll tell you verse 443 and 5:6 are all about the process of ritual prayer and what is required before doing such a prayer. And if they're taken out of their context and just given the way they've been translated, it would be clearly understandable why they would think that way. The standard translation for verse 43 reads as follows: O you who believe, do not go near the prayer while you are intoxicated, until you know what you are saying, nor if you have had intercourse, unless traveling, until you bathe. And if you are ill or traveling, or one of you has excreted feces, or you've had sexual contact with the women and could not find water, then you shall select from the clean soil. You shall wipe your faces and hands. God is pardoning, forgiving. Now, when we read that verse, it completely gives you the understanding that you're not supposed to pray while you're intoxicated until you know what you're saying. Nor if you've had, well, we won't go into the rest of it. Let's focus on that part first, because that's really where our study began, right? The things I had mentioned about intoxication or intoxicated. So in this verse, "O you who believe," so anybody and everybody who believes, whether they're agnostic, whether they're Jewish, Christian, anybody who believes in God, it doesn't say, "Oh, you who believe exactly the way I believe." It's very open to this, and there's plenty of other verses that explain why. But this is, "Oh, you who believe. Do not go near the prayer while you are intoxicated." Now, that by itself would surely tell somebody, do not pray while you're intoxicated. The issue with this, under normal practices, is that the prayer or what's considered the prayer is a step-by-step ritual whereby you're just reciting, and you're not actually communicating with Allah, nor are you communicating with other people about the deen. It is just what you and Allah, between you and Allah, with your ritual. Now, thinking about this, how would you being intoxicated truly affect your communication with Allah, when Allah is already so close as your jugular vein, knows your every thought, everything you're doing? He's already been there the whole time. Now, that's under the standard concept that intoxication typically means drinking or drugs or something of that nature. So there's a little bit of conflict there in how exactly it's affecting you or it's affecting your ritual. Maybe because it might affect how you perform your ritual. I can understand that. But does Allah put any merit into your ritual as something He requires? No. All of that comes from external sources. All that ideology and understanding and the concept of the complete ritual, the way it's practiced today, all has to derive from external sources. And Allah strictly forbids doing that. So we're not even going to discuss that, but just realize that the relation to that and that understanding comes from the corruption that's given from Hadith. So we move on. Let's move on to the rest of 443. We'll just read through it real quick. It's, after discussing that part, "Oh, you who believe, do not go near the prayer while you're intoxicated." So we got an understanding of the basic normal concept that is applied in today. Then it says, "Until you know what you are saying." Okay, makes sense as well. Nor if you had intercourse, unless traveling, until you bathe. So you're not supposed to approach the prayer if you've had intercourse unless you bathe. Kind of I'm not even going to get into that. It's like, why wouldn't you bathe after intercourse anyway? Are you that much of a dirty bird? But we're not going to discuss that. We need to put that in the back burner because we're going to come back to that and really reflect on all this here shortly. Um, and then it also says, and if you are ill or traveling or one of you has excreted one of you, speaking of two, more than one person, right? So it could be anybody. Exactly going back to all you who believe. What's unusual is it's speaking to you as if one of you in a group has excreted feces. Now, I'm not sure if that's just a mistranslation or if it's literally talking to you as the individual, but it also goes on to say, or you had sexual contact with the women, yet we've already covered that under intercourse. So why is it repeating that twice? And could not find water, i.e., you couldn't wash yourself again afterwards. Then you shall select from the clean soil. You shall wipe your face and hands. God is pardoning, forgiving. What is clean soil? And how does clean soil clean you if it's still soil? And how does it clean your odors and private parts if all you're doing is literally spreading it on your body and not getting rid of it? These are just common questions that first things I was asking when I was reading it the first time. I'm going to go to my translation of this that I've come to after doing my study, and then we're going to break down why. My current translation is here. O you who believe, do not approach the way or following of Allah while you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying, and not impure or distant in mind, except when passing through a way until you are clear-headed. And if you are ill or traveling, or you excrete feces, or you have intercourse with the women, and not you find water, then resort to earth clean, and anoint your faces and your hands. Indeed, Allah is oft pardoning, oft forgiving. Now, my translation does appear to be different, and it seems to be only mentioning intercourse once, etc. And that's because the translator of the original one used a lot of bias from the belief that from where he was coming from, i.e. from either a Sunni-based ideology, Shia-based ideology, whatever it is. The translator is translating that verse biased with his particular following or understanding applied to it. Instead of just using the Quran and using what the Quran teaches you, he used hadith-based and sunnah-based logic to insert things he thought it meant. When you go through the Arabic, which I'm not going to do, I'll leave that for other people to do, and you go word for word, you find that it's literally not the way it was translated. This is a much better understanding in my translation from what I found through going through every single Arabic word and its root meanings and understandings, and it makes much more sense, and I'll explain why. Note 1. As you can see, I put a 1 here, and this is my breakdown of that. I would say first, pay attention to the first part of the verse. It not only alludes to the understanding that intoxicants are not good, but that they are a cause of mental capacity that is not capable of clear reason or understanding, and goes on to clarify this by stating that you must be clear-headed. Now, one thing I didn't point out before we started all this is that the concept of intoxication, again, we talked briefly that a lot of people find it is alcohol or drug related or have been taught to think that way, but it is actually incorporating anything that can intoxicate or cause you to not have a clear head and clear judgment and clear reasoning and understanding. It's that encompassing. So if you are attempting to discuss the deen in public with somebody in person or just by yourself, and you are angry, or you are lustful, greedy, or approaching it with the idea of power and revenge or whatever it might be, all of that is literally intoxicating you and clouding your judgment. And you're only going to find things that are going to associate with what you've been intoxicated with. If you're angry, you're going to find the things that make you angry. Even if they're understood wrong by you, you're going to see it that way. You are approaching it in a way you're instructed not to, therefore Allah will misguide you or allow you to misguide yourself. That's a pretty powerful thing to consider and thought and think about, that a lot of people don't do when they're approaching the Deen or the Quran or talking about it in any capacity. And this is why I believe it's being pointed out so poignantly and clearly from what I can see. The next part is Note 2. Note 2, starting from except when passing through a way until you are clear-headed, is a continuation of the first part of the verse, explaining that you are not to approach, speak, address, apply, discuss, etc. anything about the way of Allah with anyone under this condition. But it's okay to travel and pass through to whatever destination, i.e., an example, if you have been drinking, you don't discuss the Deen in public with people while you're intoxicated. If you're angry, you don't discuss with people the Deen while you're angry. If you're reading the Quran, you don't read the Quran when you're angry. You've got to clear yourself and make sure your head and your mind is ready to not only give, but to receive. It goes both ways. We have to accept that Allah has no feeling, no emotion, no desire, no need, no want. None of that is, you're not going to give Allah anything. He's not going to benefit anything from us. Everything we do is for our own good and our own benefit. We have to remember that when we're reading and when we're studying and when we're sharing and when we're giving our understanding to other people. This is why the concept of compulsion is so important to keep in the back of your head when you're reading the Quran as well. Anywhere you find there's compulsion, somewhere that says you have to, or somebody that says you have to because God won't accept it otherwise, like ritual prayers and all the steps and all the walking in and out of your bathroom. I mean, all these little things that have been designed to fill your head with things to think about instead of actually focusing on what Allah intended for you. That's all stuff that you have to consider when doing this. Let's go on to Note 3. Note 3 has got a lot to it, and it's pretty important that we go over it because it defines a lot of things. Note 3 says, here the verses go from the mental state to the physical state of the person in question. 4 specific things are mentioned. 1. If you are ill or sick. 2. If you are traveling, as often in those days, you would be hot, dirty, sweaty, and smelling no different than anybody today. If you have exerted feces. If you had intercourse. And something to point out, very importantly, it mentions with women specifically. This gives the understanding that this is addressing men specifically. And we can discuss that further later. These things have one thing most in common. They are all related to odor and smell, as feces and sexual contact are covered over by clothing. They're not visible to people. Like maybe you got a dirty skid mark going in your shorts, or you had sex with somebody and it didn't bathe. They're very odorous. It seems like something gross to talk about, but you can smell when somebody's got poop on them, and you can smell when somebody's had sex and not bathed. Those are just Simple things that most people can do, and it's maybe gross seeming, but it's true. So why not be honest and talk about it? Uh, don't let it be something that is undiscussable. Now, why is that important? We go to note 4. After going through the Arabic and dissecting the verse, it becomes clear that it's not talking about washing your face and hands with dirt, as this will not clean the parts of the body soiled by feces and intercourse, and it will not clean the hands and the face. But by applying or anointing maybe natural herbs and soils and plants from the earth that are fragrant, that will help in all cases to cover or mask the odors and make the person in question more approachable. Oh, how crazy that sounds, right? A lot more reasonable than just taking soil and wiping it on your hands and face. And it's important to note that these things were pointed out separately. But the summary of this verse, as a whole, I think has more understanding to it as a whole. We talked about it in parts. Let's see the summary is together. The first part of the verse is about your mental capacity. The verse is addressing the everyday man who is out in the public. He should not discuss the deen if intoxicated by drugs, alcohol, mental incapacity like anger or fear or unfocused due to distraction. Anything like that. Under those premises, it is okay to travel about the public sphere, just do not converse about the deen. The second half is about your physical capacity. If your mental capacity is intact, then do not go about the public sphere while you are smelly and dirty and not presentable when discussing the deen. One thing that's most important to remember in all cases, once the discussion starts, you're acting as a direct representative of God and Islam. If all else fails, at least put on some cologne or fragrance to mask the smells. Otherwise, just don't do it. It's that simple. Just don't do it. There's no need to. Why jeopardize that? Let's move on to 5:6. 5:6 says, "O you who believe," we haven't changed, it's talking about all believers. Remember, and I apologize, this is the standard translation, and I'll give my translation after study. "When you stand up for the prayer, then wash your faces and your hands till the elbows, and wipe your head and your feet till the ankles. But if you are in a state of ceremonial impurity, then purify yourselves. But if you are ill or on a journey, or has come any one of you from the toilet, or has had contact with the woman and not you find water, then do it earth clean, then wipe your faces and your hands with it. Allah does not intend to make for you any difficulty, but He intends to purify you and complete His favor upon you so that you may be grateful." Almost sounds like 443. Let's see what my translation drives. "O you who believe, when you stand for, present the way of or the following of Allah, then wash your faces and your hands to the elbow, and wipe your heads to your feet and your feet to the ankles. But if not clear-headed, remote, distant, far off, aloof, then purify, clear your head yourselves. And if you are ill or traveling, or you excrete feces, or you have intercourse with the women, and not you find water, then resort to earth clean, and anoint your faces and your hands. Allah does not intend to make for you any difficulty, but He intends to cleanse you and to complete His favor upon you so that you may be acceptable." Let's go through our notes. A lot of this is going to seem repetitive, and in fact, it will be. This is the only verse, this is the difference between the two, one of them. This is the only verse giving the instruction to wash your face and your hands till the elbows, and wipe your head and your feet till the ankles. Now that in itself is important. especially to those of the mainstream following, because they often ask because they've been taught that there's no instruction how to even do this part. Yet it's right there, very clear and simple. Simple and easy. Man has made that very process so difficult and extraneous and detailed beyond belief. I won't even get into it. Again, that goes into the corruption of the external sources versus the source. As we go on here, also note there is no mention of intoxication in the beginning of this verse, like 443 has. This is important when determining the person or type of person being addressed. We'll get to that in a little bit. Note part 2, a part of the verse explaining that you're not to approach, speak, address, apply, discuss, etc., anything about the way of Allah with anyone under this mental condition, but it is okay, again, to travel and pass through to whatever destination you're going. Just don't approach it if you're intoxicated by any means. Mentally, physically, it doesn't matter. You just don't do it. Note 3. Here the verse goes from the mental state again to the physical state of the person in question, and 4 specific things are mentioned just as before. If you're ill or sick, if you're traveling, if you have excreted feces, if you've had intercourse. And again, speaking specifically about intercourse with women, thereby determining that the people being spoken to that would be in these conditions is a male representative. Nothing I can do about that. Doesn't mean it can't be a female. But this in particular kind of truly does identify that it is speaking to men specifically. And these things have one thing most in common. They're all related to odor and smell, and feces and sexual contact are covered by your clothing. They're not visible, but they are also very odorous. Note 4 goes along, very similar to the other note 4. After going through the Arabic and dissecting the verses, it becomes clear that it's not talking about washing your face and hands with dirt, as this will not clean the parts of the body soiled by feces and intercourse, and will not clean the hands and face. But by applying natural herbs, soils, and utilizing plants from the earth that are fragrant will help in all cases to cover and mask the odors and make the person in question more acceptable and approachable. So here's my summary of verse 5-6 as a total. I'll leave that up. It's too difficult to read. Summary, the first part of the verse. Again, speaking of mental capacity. The verse is addressing the person, man in this case, from what we can determine from the verse, who is intentionally going to go out to address the public, like the prophet. Always make sure you are presentable and smell pleasant before doing so. Notice there's no mention of intoxicants in this verse. That's super important. It implies that the person addressed is above this type of distraction. But he should not discuss the deen if he's mentally incapacitated by things like anger or fear or unfocused due to mental distraction. So again, that's very important to notice the distinction there. And again, under those premises, it's okay to travel about the public sphere, just do not converse the deen, about the deen, anything. And the second half goes on to do the physical capacity again. If his mental capacity is intact, do not go about the public sphere while you are smelly and dirty and not presentable when discussing the deen. Remember, once the discussion starts, you are acting as a direct representative of God and Islam. If all else fails at a minimum, when no water is around, put on some cologne or fragrance or use fragrant herbs to mask the smells. If you do not meet both criteria, then just don't do it. In today's society, we're given plenty of opportunities and the abilities to handle this in a discreet manner where it's not an issue to begin with. But this is mentioned because it covers all scenarios or things that could happen and get to that point. Now, an overall summary of both verses. Both verse 443 and 5:6 seem to say the same things, but they are indeed distinctly different. As defined, verse 443 appears to be addressing all who believe about what is expected of men when it pertains to discussing the deen in public. Now, I say when it is expected of men, but I would gather this applies to both men and women because it says, "O you who believe." Verse 5:6 appears to be addressing all you who believe about what is expected of someone of a higher status, such as the prophet or somebody who's a scholar or a learned person, and somebody who's going to be in front of more than just a person but a group or representing in a large format. 443 never tells you to specifically wash your face and hands and wipe your head and your feet till the ankles. Now, this is also important to remember. Why? Well, because according to the chronological order of verses, this came before 5:6. Well, if this verse came before 5:6, there's a big window of verses that are in between those two. Then when were they taught to do it? Because 5:6 came afterwards, so at that point it had to be taught when it came, right? Something to think about. It addresses intoxicants. Is addressing men specifically as the ones intended to do the task, as it is only addressing ones who've had sexual contact with the women. There is no mention of women who have had sexual contact with men. In the end, the verse it says God is pardoning and forgiving. Also important to remember. 5:6 never mentions intoxicants. It's specific about standing, presenting, and then washing as if the process is a public show of it as well. It is addressing men specifically as the ones intended to do the task, as it only addresses one who has had sexual contact with the woman. There is no mention of women who have had sexual contact with men, nor is it implied that way. In the end of the verse, it is clearly different in addressing that the individual is more than the average person, as Allah says. Here's another important point again. He intends to cleanse you and to complete his favor upon you so that you may be acceptable. To who? To those around him. Again, clearly defining that this individual in 5:6 is literally going to be presenting himself to more than one person, to a group, to a township, to a nation, period. It could be to all. So it's imperative that that person doing this, i.e. the prophet, a scholar, somebody, whoever is going to be in front of more than just your average Joe, needs to make sure that they're representing Allah in that way. So, as always, I'm open for discussion on the topic and always open for constructive criticism. I'm not here to say my way is the only way. I'm not here to claim that I'm all-knowing. I'm all learning. And I have accepted that what I know today may be less than what I know tomorrow. And I might learn something new, and if I find it true, I will apply it. I will learn it and understand it as that truth comes to me. One of the things that really are a misunderstanding is the idea that you cannot read the Quran yourself and learn from it and understand it. The Imams and that will tell you, the leaders will tell you, oh, you're just all going to be learning different stuff. You all won't be the same. But that's not a bad thing. Nor is it a wrong thing. Because we're all individually responsible for what we learn. And Allah makes it clear that whatever we get from it and we accept and practice, that's what we're going to be judged by. That's what we're going to be we're going to be held accountable for. So I take that very seriously. I don't accept just what the imam tells me, or I don't accept just what the scholar says. I have to literally go do my own research and check and take the Quran, the criteria that is Allah has set above all others for judgment of truth and authenticity. If it's correct and right, the Quran will tell you it's correct and right. If it's wrong, it will tell you it's wrong. And if it's not in the book, if it's not in there, then it's not part of the deen. It's not what's necessary to practice it, to live by it. When people recognize it's not a religion, like Christianity and Judaism and any others, it's not a set of rituals and practices that everybody does together. That doesn't make you or help you, or it's not what Allah teaches you. The book of the Quran is a simple way of life. It's that plain and easy. But people want to be like the story of the cow and want so much more out of it because they're so afraid to think for themselves. They just want a set of rituals and practices that they have to do every day, so they can believe that themselves that they're doing the minimum necessary to get to heaven. And that's really the truth of it. That's what it comes down to for the majority of the masses. There are a lot of people who are willing to be thinkers and ponder and go beyond that. And those are the ones that are always finding these truths, these differences. They recognize it and they realize that they've been misled and misguided this whole time. And that it's not a religion, but a simple way of life. There's no rituals and things that you have to do that are mandatory for God to hear you or accept you. It's your actions and your deeds that are done for Allah that's what count. If you force your child to memorize the Quran as soon as the child has the ability to do so, because you believe you're going to earn a place in heaven, you're doing it because you're selfish and you're thinking only for yourself. You've intoxicated yourself with that and allowed yourself to believe that somebody else's deeds would give you the access to heaven because you didn't do your own good deeds. Think about that. If you go to Hajj, the current practice of Hajj, because you believe all your sins are going to be wiped away, like somebody who gets baptized in Christianity. Oh, you get this done, and Ali oxen free, you've got no sins, you're clear, you get to start over. It's all a lie. Everything you do and you have done will be in your book. It doesn't disappear. God doesn't tell you that. You will be accountable for all of your actions and all the things you've done. Everything you've done for yourself, for greed, for ego, for lust, for desire, for power, all of it. If you're doing those things to benefit yourself and not for the sake of Allah, then that's where your problem's at. And it clearly shows when you see those who practice Hadith and Sunnah and their attitudes, the way they treat people, the way they've been taught to treat people who do not think or believe the way they do as sinners and kafirs and evil people, and that they have the right to kill or lie to them and do all these things that Allah clearly says is not allowed. You guys have let yourself be sheep and led to slaughter because you're not taking responsibility for you and what you know and understand and making sure that you've gone to the Quran and verified thoroughly that it's true and acceptable. It's truly important to think about all of that. I love you all. And anybody who believes in God or doesn't believe in God, It's not my place to judge you. It's not my place to chastise you or be mean to you or treat you disrespectfully or curse at you or call you names or threaten to rape you, whatever it may be. I've heard it all. I'm not lying. None of that is fake. Every single bit of that I've heard people say to people. And much, much worse. And they call themselves Muslim. They say they submit to God alone. But they're not living by the laws and rules that Allah has set for them. They're living by the laws and rules that man has taught them and created for himself to circumvent what Allah has set for them. If you can't see that and recognize that in your behavior and actions and all of the crazy stuff that Sahih Hadith say about the Prophet, or say that they recollect the Prophet has said or done, you can't recognize the bad parts of that and realize that you're being led to believe it's all true and acceptable, then you've got a ways to go. You have to take it back to the book and confirm the truth. No matter what you do, every single hadith and sunnah have to pass what Allah has given for criteria to pass as true, to pass as lawful, to pass as acceptable for the deen. Period. End of story. So I'm going to leave with that. May God grant us all the opportunity and the ability to understand and learn from His book, and to gain the knowledge necessary to live our lives in a way that Allah will give us the opportunity to reach Jannah. Peace and blessings. May you all have a wonderful day.